Even a basic economist, Mr. Speaker, knows that if you tax something, you get less of it. You don't need to have worked at the Bank of England for 10 years, Mr. Speaker, to know that.
And we've now drawn a line under the fiction peddled by the previous government. We've put our public finances back on a firm footing.
As today's budget do, it raises tax on working people by increasing national insurance and breaking Labour's promise.
This emergency budget has brought the Right Honourable Lady to a cold, hard reckoning. These weren't just words thrown across the Commons. They marked the moment Rachel Reeves's economic narrative began to unravel. While the Chancellor pointed fingers at external factors like Ukraine and President Trump, the Shadow Chancellor exposed the truth. The OBR confirms growth has been halved this year due to Reeves's own decisions. The question is, can your household finances survive the consequences of this deception? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. The Shadow Chancellor's takedown of Reeves wasn't just a political spat. It was a systematic exposé of what appears to be calculated economic deception. At the heart of the controversy lies Reeves's persistent drumbeat about a supposed £22 billion black hole in Britain's finances. This fiscal boogeyman became her go-to justification for the painful economic medicine she's now administering to the public.
For our public finances and indeed for growth. We're making the decisions to get our public finances on a firm trajectory and also to boost the growth potential of our economy.
So what did the Chancellor tax? She taxed jobs and wealth creation. She's destroyed livelihoods, businesses clobbered, big and small.
Now, consultants can play an important role, but taxpayers must get value for money. So we will introduce tough new rules.
But was this crisis even real? In a blistering Commons exchange, the Shadow Chancellor didn't mince words, labeling the black hole as pure fantasy and a convenient smokescreen engineered specifically to obscure, broken election promises. The credibility gap widened further when it emerged that the Office for Budget Responsibility, the very body tasked with providing independent economic analysis, refused to legitimize Reeves's £22 billion figure. This absence of verification from Britain's fiscal watchdog raises profound questions about the factual basis of the government's entire economic narrative. What's particularly striking is the strategic timing of this crisis narrative. Rather than an honest assessment of economic realities, the Shadow Chancellor suggests it was a carefully orchestrated prelude to prepare the public for the inevitable. Tax increases and spending cuts that were never mentioned during the election campaign. The contrast between Reeves's pre-election promises of fiscal prudence and her post-election actions creates a jarring disconnect.
We won't borrow to fund day-to-day spending. We'll bring debt down as a share of our economy. And then only subject to that, we will invest in the things that can boost our productivity. Well, you've been running a campaign for a long time to freeze the fuel duty, and that's a cost of £3 billion, but it was the right decision.
If you ramp up taxes, if you ramp up borrowing and spending without any commensurate improvement in productivity, it leads to growing inflation.
That's difficult to ignore. When challenged on these inconsistencies, Reeves has developed a curious habit of pointing fingers everywhere but at herself. The war in Ukraine, President Trump, President Putin, all feature prominently in her explanations for Britain's economic challenges. This external blame game serves a clear purpose: deflecting responsibility from her own policy decisions onto global bogeymen beyond her control. But if the £22 billion black hole was indeed fabricated, what's actually happening with Britain's finances? The Shadow Chancellor delivered the sobering reality. Inflation is now projected to run at twice the level previously expected. And contrary to Reeves's narrative of external causation, the finger points directly at her own economic decisions.
The Chancellor just now trumpeted the fact that there have been 3 interest rate cuts since the Labour Party came to office. She knows full well there should have been more than that had she managed.
But coupled with reform, I know we can bring that investment back to Britain to grow our economy. And that is why, at this budget, we did wipe the slate clean to put public finances and public services on a firm footing.
This inflation revelation isn't just a technical footnote for economists. It represents tangible pain for ordinary Britons already struggling with a cost of living crisis. Higher prices, stagnant wages, and diminished purchasing power, all exacerbated not by distant geopolitical forces, but by specific policy choices made in Whitehall. Behind the inflation figures lurks a human tragedy unfolding in communities across Britain. When major retailers announce redundancies by the thousands, we're no longer discussing abstract economic theories. We're witnessing the devastating human cost of what the Shadow Chancellor bluntly calls taxing jobs and wealth creation. The evidence is mounting in a troubling cascade of job losses.
Given her track record, given the fact that she has failed to control spending and borrowing to date, what does she think the markets are going to make of her latest promises?
Have done the responsible thing with this budget, and we've taken key decisions, made key choices. We've chosen to protect working people, and therefore
The compensation schemes that they did not fund, and their failure to assess the scale of the challenges facing our public services.
The retail sector, often a barometer of economic health, is hemorrhaging jobs at an alarming rate. As the Shadow Chancellor pointedly documented, Morrison's is shedding 200 positions, Tesco cutting 400 jobs, and Sainsbury's slashing an eye-watering 3,000 jobs. These aren't just statistics. They represent thousands of families facing uncertainty, mortgage payments at risk, and dreams deferred. Each redundancy notice carries with it a ripple effect through local economies already struggling under inflationary pressures. Small businesses, traditionally the backbone of British innovation and employment, are signalling distress.
Chancellor, none of your colleagues will tell me how fast.
Will require difficult decisions, but they're ones that this government are prepared to make because we know the importance of economic and fiscal stability. I will end the tax loophole, which exempts private schools from paying VAT and business rates.
The Federation of Small Business has reported business confidence plummeting to its lowest level on record outside of pandemic times. This unprecedented crisis of confidence isn't happening in a vacuum. It's a direct response to policy decisions emanating from Westminster. The mechanics of this job destruction are surprisingly straightforward. When the government increases national insurance burdens on employers, it directly impacts hiring decisions. Companies face a brutal equation. Higher employment taxes mean fewer new positions, downward pressure on wages, and ultimately, redundancies. The Shadow Chancellor didn't mince words when describing this process as taxing jobs and wealth creation, a policy approach that actively undermines economic growth rather than stimulating it. Particularly concerning is the Shadow Chancellor's revelation that welfare reforms have been rushed through without proper impact assessments.
They will not legitimise. She chose to be reckless with a sliver of headroom against her fiddled targets.
Sitting on the fence, you change the country by leading, by taking action, and that is what this government are doing. And Mr. Speaker, he says you're seeing it around the world. It is unlocking investment around the world. I want those jobs. I want that investment in Britain, and with Labour, we will.
This hasty implementation threatens to leave vulnerable populations without adequate protection just as economic headwinds intensify. The lack of thorough analysis suggests a concerning pattern. Policy decisions made for political expediency rather than economic soundness. The financial ripple effects extend beyond employment figures. Persistent inflation and increased borrowing costs are keeping interest rates artificially elevated, creating a toxic environment for both household mortgages and business loans. This financial squeeze further constrains economic activity, creating a negative feedback loop of economic contraction. Perhaps most damning is the contradiction at the heart of government policy.
Through tax receipts, and we can only in the future borrow to invest in our economy, and we've got to bring in private sector investment alongside any investment.
It was the Right Honourable Lady who confected the £22 billion black hole.
We have called in planning decisions around onshore wind, housing and data centres to unlock the private investment that wants to come to Britain.
While Reeves champions a back-to-work agenda with one hand, her economic decisions have led the Office for Budget Responsibility to forecast rising unemployment for years to come. This fundamental contradiction exposes a troubling disconnect between rhetoric and reality. What the Shadow Chancellor's scathing critique reveals is nothing short of a fundamental truth. Rachel Reeves has become the architect of her own misfortune. This isn't merely political theatre, it's a sobering assessment of economic reality. The Chancellor's efforts to attribute Britain's financial struggles to external bogeymen like Putin or Trump simply doesn't withstand scrutiny. As the Shadow Chancellor pointedly observed, these economic challenges stem directly from Reeves's own decisions. While she continues to deflect responsibility, businesses close their doors and workers lose their livelihoods. His call for a more resilient economic approach strikes at the heart of the matter. Building a robust economy requires acknowledging one's role in its current state. The question now facing Britain isn't whether these policies have failed, but whether this government will ever accept accountability for the consequences of their choices. The economic damage already inflicted suggests a troubling answer.